Good morning, and welcome to the Atlantic Council for today's event, a back-to-business birthday, priorities for the 2024 NATO Summit in Washington. My name is Matthew Kranig. I'm Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. The North Atlantic Alliance turned 75 years old this April, and there's much to celebrate. The alliance is larger and more united than ever before. The accession of Finland and Sweden added 2 highly capable militaries to NATO's roster. Allies bolstered NATO's regional force posture with the adoption of a new suite of defense plans. And after decades of underinvestment, NATO European allies have ramped up defense spending in support of Ukraine and in recognition of the mounting Russian threat. These causes for celebration, however, are juxtaposed with a deteriorating security environment, including Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine and a collection of unfinished business from last year's Vilnius summit. So securing the future of the world's most successful military alliance will require this year's summit to be one of implementation. Come July, NATO will be expected to take action to improve the under-equipped state of its defense industrial base, reinforce its vulnerable eastern flank, and demonstrate a new family of plans while preparing for new challenges, including those beyond its traditional area of responsibility. How will this slate of issues feature in the Washington Summit agenda? And what will allies actually need to deliver to ensure the alliance is able to defend every inch of NATO territory? Today's curtain raiser discussion will preview priorities ahead of what is expected to be a pivotal summit, offering the Transatlantic Alliance and its community of decision makers tangible courses of action to secure the future of the world's strongest military alliance. This conference today is part of our broader campaign of analysis and programming to prepare for the crucial NATO summit taking place in less than 100 days. So I encourage you all to stay tuned for even more of us more from us over the coming weeks. Convenings like this are central to the Scowcroft Center's mission of developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies. The Center also honors General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership and cooperation with allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. Joining us today to share their perspectives include H.E. Laurynas Kasčiūnas, Minister of National Defense of the Republic of Lithuania, as well as other senior U.S. and allied officials, including the Honorable Julianne Smith, U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Anniken Krutnes, Ambassador of Norway to the United States, Oksana Markarova, Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, Ambassador Yuri Kim, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Tom Wright, Senior Director for Strategic Planning on the National Security Council staff, Mr. Axel Dittmann, Deputy Chief of Mission and Charge d'Affaires at the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany to the United States, and Mr. James Roscoe, Deputy Head of Mission at the British Embassy in Washington. The Atlantic Council would like to thank the Lithuanian Ministry of National Defense, our partners in today's conference, for their longstanding support of the Atlantic Council. We're shaping the global future together with allies and partners, and nowhere is our mission more important than conversations like this one. Throughout today's discussion, there will be time to ask questions in person or virtually via askac.org. We encourage you to ask questions or join the conversation on X using the hashtag #StrongerWithAllies. Thank you all again for joining, and now I would like to turn to Minister Kasčiūnas for keynote remarks. The minister was appointed to this position in March 2024 and previously served on the National Security and Defense Committee of the Lithuanian Parliament. It's our distinct pleasure to be hosting him during his first official visit to the United States. So without further ado, Mr. Kasčiūnas, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Dear Matt, thank you very much. Lithuanian Ministry of Defense is very happy to cooperate with Atlantic Council, and we are looking forward for even deeper one. So, about upcoming Washington summit, about Russia, and about the eastern flank. So first of all, I will say a few words about Russia capabilities and potential now to challenge NATO eastern flank. I think last year we had some mood in Western strategic thinking, a little bit underestimating Russians' ability to adapt to the new situation. What we need to say, first thing, Russia put their economy on a war mode. And there are many examples when they are moving forward. For example, production of ammunition. Before a full-scale war in Ukraine, they produced 300,000-400,000 152 and other ammunition. Now we're producing 2.2 million of them. It is despite sanctions. It is despite our attempts to isolate them. So we are on the war mode. And sometimes we are hearing the questions, okay, but we cannot last long in such kind of mode. But I think sometimes we apply Western criteria, Western thinking criteria to Russia, and it's not adequate. Because we don't care about the social welfare, we don't care about any social things of society, because society is manipulated, society is socially engineered. And of course, because of authoritarian regime, first of all. So that's why, when you want to understand Russia, you should not apply the Western criteria of thinking. It's a pragmatical criteria, which is not necessary in the strategic thinking of Russia. Second thing, what we also solved, it's so-called mobilization reserve. We create a so-called mercenary army. We are paying some money for lower social strata people, citizens in Russia, and attract them to the war. And you know, 25 millions, this is a number when we ask how many mobilization reserve Russia can have. So it's 25 millions. Comparing with us, comparing with Ukraine, it's a big numbers. So this is what we need to understand. We are preparing. The problem is that when we try to tackle this challenge, we always were counting how many years we need. 3, 5, 7, you know, many interpretations, many countings. I think we should change the approach. We should build our defense and deterrence in that mode and manner, in eastern flank, in the whole NATO, to control the process. So do not count their years, but to control the process and to deter them. That's why NATO decisions is so important. And I want to say what the moves and actions and direction after Madrid, Vilnius summits, I think it's a positive one. It's a positive one. First of all, of course, new defense plans. I think it's a breakthrough. So we transformed from deterrence by punishment concept to deterrence by denial, especially after Irpin, Bucha, when you saw, but after their occupation, there is nothing to take back. So we need to fight on the line. We need to be ready to fight on the line and to deter on the line. That's why we need to have a credible defense and deterrence architecture based on principle forward defense. And the plans, together with fast reinforcement, is a good direction to act. We need to tackle still the problems. As you know, capability gaps, air defense, maneuver capabilities, long strike capabilities, but little by little we are moving forward. The authorities of secure. This is very important for us, for Eastern flank, to be much more flexible responding to the possible threats and risks. The intelligence indicator shows that it's already a crisis coming. We need to react for deterrence. Not fighting for the aggression, but to deter them. That's why we need flexible decisions, flexible response. And more authority, more powers for secure is very, very important. And I would say we're also moving little by little toward this direction. We need exercises based on Article 5 with transatlantic reinforcement. I think it's also would be very important. So executability of defense plans. This is number one, what we need to do. Second point is, of course, defense investment and defense production. I will not say anything now new. You know it very well. We are trying. Also, Europe is trying. We increased our production in ammunition about 50%. Of course, Europe is not on the war stage economy, but we are trying to find the solutions. Also in Lithuania, also in Europe. We agreed in Vilnius that 2% is only the floor for defense spending, and we should try to transform the money into the capabilities. How to do it in a faster way? It's still a big challenge, because even now, if you have contract somewhere for the ammunition, for the weapons, even if you have the money now, it comes in 4 years. It's not like in Russia, as we know. So we have improved in this direction. One representative of one military industry in Europe said to me, we in Europe not producing, we are manufacturing. It's a little bit different way of doing it when it's our adversaries are doing. So of course, defense industrial base. We should improve here as much as possible. Talking about defense architecture, I should mention, I think, very important decision made by Germany in Lithuania. Brigade in place, which we agreed with Germany on a roadmap, implementing step by step. I think it's a role model for our Eastern flank countries, what kind of forward defense architecture we should build in Eastern flank. And, but of course, it works only with United States of America in Europe and Eastern flank. So that's why when we are doing it with Germany, the same, your presence, heel-to-toe model, rotational, persistent but rotational model of your troops in Baltics, in Lithuania, is vital for us. It's a vital factor of deterrence. I can say even one joke. When I was a chair of Defense Committee, we also have many formats, Nordic Baltics, and we met one senior expert analyst and some generals from Western countries. And when my colleague from Nordic countries, he liked such kind of questions: who is stronger, like a tiger or something, or leopard or something like that? And he asked, "Tell me, which army in Europe is the strongest one?" And the general said, American. No. In Europe, we know that America is the strongest. No, he said, America. So even in Europe, American forces is the strongest forces. So that's why America is so vital for European security. But of course, as we see, Europe also investing into defense, taking responsibility, taking actions is also important. And I think Germany is doing a great job in Eastern flank. Third point, air defense. We need to create the integrated system. We know very well that air defense capabilities have a biggest deficit in NATO. So producing the air defense, long range, medium range, short range, it's a vital. That's why now we in Lithuania also a little bit shifting our priorities, I would say. We're trying to make our Lithuanian division heavier, creating the tank battalion step by step, but also investing more into the middle range air defense systems, which could help to defend not only our armies, but also our citizens in the cities, as we see in Ukraine, how it is vital. Fourth thing, thinking about the deterrence and defense and architecture, is of course Ukraine. It's Ukrainian Euro-Atlantic aspirations. We know very well Ukrainians are fighting not only for themselves, they are fighting for Europe. And we are just asking for weapons and ammunition, We do not ask for troops. So give them tools to fight with empire and to control and to contain the empire. It's so simple. It looks like if you do not send the troops somewhere defending the NATO country, it's the most cheapest way to give weapons and ammunition to Ukraine. Simple as that. It's not simple in political situation as we see. When we're talking about NATO and Ukrainian relations, I know it's difficult. Lithuania will stand always for invitation. But at the same time, we should not give to Russia informal veto power on NATO enlargement. No third country should have such kind of blocking right. That's when our decision in Washington should be also based on that assumption. Fifth point, it's NATO and Indo-Pacific. I think the trends, processes, and the situations are interconnected. And I think we should also do more in closer cooperation between two regions, especially thinking how to contain and control the authoritarian regimes, which are interconnection between themselves, as we know very well. So these are the main 5 points. And for the last thing, but also, I would say, important one, I would want to do a little bit to talk about this puzzle which called escalation-de-escalation thinking. I know it sometimes very much restricts some moves, especially in the NATO, when we are thinking about support to Ukraine. And, you know, doing nothing is escalatory. We should put in mind it, because it's Russia. If you will just, you know, think that you will not do anything, we will, you know, consider it as you as a peaceful, no. We will take and break you. We respect only if you're strong. Very simple thing. Peace through strength. You know it very well. Classical things. So that's why we need to escape from this dilemma of escalatory, de-escalatory, which Russia is always trying to play with us. And that's why we need active defense, sometimes even creating for Russia also dilemmas, not only their dilemmas for us, but our dilemmas for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those thoughtful comments, Mr. Cunis. And I believe I know you have a busy schedule, but I think we have time for at least a few questions. Sure. And so I wanted to start with the threat environment, because I think some in the United States might say, well, Russia turned out to be weaker than we thought. It has its hands full in Ukraine. Putin's not foolish enough to attack a NATO ally anytime soon. But you're right there on the front lines. So can you share with us what are the realities of the security situation on NATO's eastern flank and the Russian threat?
Several factors. Yeah, if you look at Kaliningrad now, there are even less capabilities than it was before the war, because it's delivered to Ukraine, you know. But at the same time, we know that these forces and capabilities could be reinforced very fast, very fast. You know, Shoigu, he presented a new reform in army reform, especially in western direction, on western district in 22 December, to transform the brigades into division level. And if you look at their capabilities to do it in personnel level, they can do it very fast. Their war industry also is capable, maybe not very much technological sophisticated, but you know, to contribute the technical equipment for that kind of building that kind of a new architecture. That's why it's where we can do it very fast. It's, as an authoritarian country, they can do it very fast. That's why we should adapt. And the best adaptation is, of course, defense and deterrence architecture, which I talked a little bit. Another important factor is Belarus. We don't see Belarus as an independent country. It's already integrated in all that kind of domains of Russia, especially in military terms. And also, I remember one conversation with some Ukrainians, but it was before the war. In 2014, one of the key Ukrainians was also, at that time, was ideas that Russia can use Belarus also after Maidan to attack. He went to Lukashenko saying, President, could you give me a guarantee that Russia will not use your territory? He said officially, yes, of course, we're an independent state. In the evening, after some drinks, he asked the same question, and he told him, I will inform in 48 hours if they go. It was in 2014. I don't know how much hours now he has. I think nothing. That's why we do not see them as an independent country, and it's also an important factor. So, but of course, if you look, another special problem could be it's no notice or short notice scenarios. So if you talk about conventional threats, conventional divisional war, so of course intelligence, we have good capabilities for early warning system. But for no notice or short notice scenarios, something hybrid things below Article number 5, we should also be prepared for that kind of things. And as you know, we already survived one of the attacks. It was so-called instrumentalized migration, when Lukashenko pushed people through our borders, and we need to adapt to that situation. So such kind of scenarios also could be barriers, and we need to be ready for that.
That makes sense, and you talked about the need then to have the proper defense and deterrence architecture. As you know, at the Vilnius summit last year, these new regional plans were agreed to, kind of the first serious NATO defense plans, arguably since the end of the Cold War. But there have been some public reporting that we don't yet have the capabilities that we need for these plans. Do we have what we need to defend NATO's eastern flank? And if not, what are the biggest gaps in your view?
I think we have, but we have some gaps, as you said. So that's why, of course, air defense, heavier divisions, so it's tanks, artillery systems, deep strike capabilities. I think we have a list of so-called gaps, but the gaps which we can control. I mean, if we are moving forward defense with a new energy, I think we can find the solutions. But here is the most important thing, America and Europe. Without America, security of Europe is impossible. That's why we are doing ourselves. We know what we should invest in our defense, and we are doing, our aim is 3%. We see in the Baltics 3% as a floor, not a 2. In the Baltics, we see as a 3% as a floor. And we will achieve, I think, this year. So that's why we are doing a lot of things, total defense also included. But at the same time, we sending the message to the United States, we need you also. So that's why presence of United States in Europe is biggest and most credible deterrence factor.
Good. Well, I've had the opportunity to visit Lithuania and meet with the American and German commanders on the ground there, and I think that is really powerful to have that visible manifestation of American power there on the ground. Yeah. So a big summit coming up, 75th anniversary of NATO. People are debating what should the priorities be. From Lithuania's point of view, what are the major priorities for the summit? What would you like to see as the main deliverables coming out of the summit?
Executability of the defense plans, filling the gaps, air defense. We have this called air defense rotational model, but because of deficit in NATO, we need to mobilize a little more resources into that, and of course Ukraine.
Yes. Can you say more? Of course, Ukraine. What would you like to see?
Invitation. Mm-hmm. Of course, invitation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I have many more questions, but looking at the clock, I think we've come to the end of our time. And any brief thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience?
Just to thank you, and thank United States for, in historical terms, for us, for our nation, America, and helping in our freedom fighting in every stage of our history was so crucial. And that's why if you ask Lithuanians which country always was the most closest to Lithuania in historical terms, supporting our independence, statehood, is the United States. And that's why Lithuania is so transatlantic. So keep the transatlantic bonds, and we will be safe Western civilization together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks also to Lithuania. And as you know, burden sharing is becoming a political issue in the United States. Yeah. And so it's great to see allies like Lithuania that are more than pulling their weight. But thank you very much, Minister Cunis, for taking the time with us this morning. We really appreciate your insights and look forward to continuing these critical discussions in the months leading up to the Washington summit.
Thank you.
So now I think it's time to transition to our next segment, and I'll turn the microphone to Philip Dickinson, who is leading our Transatlantic Security Initiative. Philip.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Minister Kasčiūnas, for sharing Lithuania's perspectives. Lithuania is a vital ally, and we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and perspectives as we make the transition from Vilnius to Washington. As Dr. Koenig said, my name is Phil Dickinson. I am the acting director of the Transatlantic Security Initiative here in the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Continuing with our program, we will shift our focus to Brussels. We will just take a brief pause whilst we wait for the Ambassador, Honorable Julianne Smith, US Ambassador to NATO in Brussels, for a conversation moderated by Andrew Desiderio, Senior Congressional Reporter with Punchbowl News. So we will be back in just one moment. Very much, and welcome back, everybody. We're pleased to turn to the next session, which is a speaker spotlight discussion with the Honorable Julianne Smith, US Ambassador to NATO, moderated by Andrew Desiderio, Senior Congressional Reporter with Punchbowl News. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of you for joining us here in person, as well as on the live stream for today's event, a Back to Business Birthday, Priorities for the 2024 NATO Summit here in Washington. My name is Andrew Desiderio. I'm the Senior Congressional Reporter for Punchbowl News, where we cover the power, people, and politics that drive the decision-making in our nation's capital, specifically on Capitol Hill. I am delighted to be joined this morning, well, it's afternoon for her, by by the Honorable Julianne Smith, the United States Permanent Representative to NATO, for a conversation here about U.S. priorities heading into the summit here in Washington. Ambassador, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. I wanted to note at the outset, you were confirmed by the United States Senate in November of 2021 by a voice vote. I know you had to wait a little bit to get that final confirmation done, but I just wanted to emphasize the fact that the ambassador was confirmed by voice vote in the United States Senate. Obviously, we know that in today's Senate, voice votes for diplomatic nominees are very few and far between. So I wanted to mention that at the outset. Prior to her Senate confirmation, Ambassador Smith was a senior advisor to Secretary Blinken at the State Department. She was also Deputy National Security Advisor to then Vice President Joe Biden. With that, I want to dive right in. Ambassador, I don't think there's any doubt that NATO is stronger today than it's ever been. It's certainly bigger than it's ever been when we talk about the accession of 2 new member nations. And of course, the alliance celebrated the 75th anniversary this year. So celebrate we can, but of course there are some serious challenges as well that are top of mind for you and the work that you do there in Brussels. For one, Ukraine is at a pivotal point right now in its war with Russia. There's uncertainty about Ukraine's path to NATO membership, and of course geopolitical uncertainty with elections happening on both sides of the Atlantic this year that could have real impacts on the alliance as a whole. So with that backdrop, I'd like to get you to talk about how you define success at this year's NATO summit, where there will presumably continue to be questions about the longevity, if you will, of the Western coalition supporting Ukraine.
Sure. Well, thanks for the invitation. It's great to join you this morning on the other side of the pond. Virtually, wish I could be there in person, but alas, this virtual connection will have to do. In terms of the upcoming summit in July, I think I would define success in kind of 3 main baskets. So first and foremost, as you said at the top, this is in essence a celebration at its very heart. We are marking 75 years of working together with our allies in the NATO alliance, over 7 decades of every U.S. president, irrespective of their political affiliation, supporting and leading this alliance, and we expect that to continue. So it will be a celebration thinking about the alliance's agility, its adaptability, its resilience in the face of all sorts of new challenges. So that's success number 1, making sure that we take a minute to mark the moment, mark 75 years of working closely with our allies and all that this alliance has been able to achieve over 7+ decades. Basket number 2 in terms of success is marking a moment in terms of burden sharing. 10 years ago, allies agreed to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. When we made that pledge, 3 allies were spending 2% of GDP on defense. Today, at last count, we are at least at 20. Maybe we'll get 1 or 2 more before the summit occurs. But we're going to be at the point where we can celebrate 2/3 of the allies meeting the 2% pledge. Now, the real celebration will come when we get to 32. And in the years ahead, we will be getting more and more allies. And we are marching towards that day when every member of the alliance will hit the 2%. But burden sharing will be a big part of what we talk about at the summit. And it'll be a key feature of the public engagement. And also when we talk about burden sharing, we just don't mean 2%. We are also talking about what we are all doing together to support our friends in Ukraine. And that brings me to the last category in terms of really marking success, having the opportunity to welcome President Zelensky to Washington to stand with 32 other leaders, to lock arms with him and make sure that Moscow understands a single message, and that is NATO allies aren't going anywhere. We are not distracted. We're not looking away. We're not growing impatient. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And I think the message of solidarity, of resolve, of unity around what's happening in Ukraine will be a key feature of this summit. And of course, we are working right now on an actual deliverable for Ukraine, which we might want to get into here in our discussion. But broadly, I would say celebrating NATO's 75 years, ensuring that we help the world understand how important burden sharing is and how far we've come inside the alliance on that front, and making sure that Russia understands that we are all ready to continue supporting our friends in Ukraine so that they can prevail. All of that will be part of a successful summit.
You mentioned a deliverable for Ukraine. I'd like you to get into that if you can, to the extent that you can. And also note that Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Ian Brzezinski recently wrote that this year's summit should, quote, grant Ukraine a clear path to NATO membership. Do you agree with that? And if so, what needs to happen specifically at this year's summit in order to make that happen?
Well, first at the top, let me say NATO allies have been crystal clear. We've been clear since 2008 that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance. We reaffirmed that last year at the Vilnius summit when we said that Ukraine's future place is in NATO, but we were not prepared last summer to extend a proper invitation to Ukraine for full-fledged membership, and I am not expecting the alliance to do that this summer. What I am expecting allies to do is to construct a bridge to membership by offering Ukraine a deliverable that will enable them to become even closer to this alliance. Last summer, we created something called the NATO Ukraine Council, which just met a couple of weeks ago with President Zelensky, which enables Ukraine to come to the NATO table, sit at the table as an equal, and discuss whatever is on their mind. In this moment, we were able to talk to President Zelensky about his very real defense requirements, what they need right now in real time for success on the battlefield. But this NATO Ukraine Council is something that we already created last summer, and you're going to see more news on what the allies are prepared to unveil this summer at the summit. I can't go into a lot of detail because allies are in the process of debating that right now, but what I will say is we are looking at a way to institutionalize here at NATO some of the bilateral support that's been provided to Ukraine over the last 2 years.
As you know, Ambassador, last week, Congress finally sent a Ukraine aid package to President Biden's desk. It took several months. It took many iterations. It doesn't take a political scientist to conclude that support for Ukraine, at least in Congress, has gone down. Much of it, of course, is driven by the far right, as it is in other countries as well. You mentioned transatlantic unity and highlighting that at this year's summit. But what else can be done here in Washington in July to sort of counteract those forces?
Well, we're not waiting for July. I will say we collectively, the allies themselves and the United States, we are all working together to get a message out. We're getting a message out about the importance of this alliance, why it was important that we created it 75 years ago, but also to help Americans and publics on the other side of the Atlantic understand how NATO is a very different organization. NATO was created in a different era, and it was prepared for different threats. It was much smaller. There were only 12 founding members. We're almost at triple that now with 32 member states. And we don't just limit ourselves to our work here in terms of conventional military threats. This alliance, day in and day out, is looking at a variety of threats that cross a full definition of security challenges and threats. They represent our work on climate security, our work on cyber attacks, the emerging and disruptive technology, resilience, women, peace, and security. I could go on and on. We're working hard here on defense production. So what was once an alliance that focused primarily on conventional military threats now is an alliance that copes with and addresses the full spectrum of security challenges as defined by the 32 allies. So we have been working through public messaging campaigns to get the word out, to answer tough questions from students, from veterans groups, from the private sector, from small town mayors and governors. I've been out myself traveling across the United States, but so have many of our allies. They've made special trips to places like Iowa and Texas and Alabama and beyond. We have to broaden the conversation we're having in the United States about why we created NATO and why it's still important 75 years later. So this is an ongoing conversation that we're having with a variety of audiences, and I think you'll see that engagement carry through right up to the summit and, in fact, beyond.
As you know, Ambassador, the Senate NATO Observer Group is very active on all of the things you just mentioned. In a recent letter to President Biden, the co-chairs of that group, Senators Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire and Thom Tillis of North Carolina, wrote that this year's summit should feature, quote, a recognition of a stronger NATO partnership with allies in the Indo-Pacific. And one of the things that stood out to me, having attended the last two NATO summits in Madrid as well as in Vilnius last year, was the presence of these foreign leaders from Indo-Pacific nations. And you know, they are really engaged on the bigger picture security challenges, particularly Ukraine, even though China is the pacing threat in their own backyard. For example, the Japanese Prime Minister has said the best way to deter President Xi from launching an invasion of Taiwan is to defeat Putin in Ukraine. You hear, you know, a lot of people on Capitol Hill, including Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, say things like deterrence is not divisible. In other words, you can't allow Putin to just run roughshod over Ukraine, but also credibly say that you want to deter China from going into Taiwan. Can you talk a little bit about the involvement of Indo-Pacific nations in NATO as a whole, what you expect at the July summit in that respect, and can you talk about sort of why it's important to have them at the table?
Well, thanks for that. Absolutely. So NATO has 4 Indo-Pacific partners, and those countries are Japan, Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. These are 4 countries that have spent recent years moving closer to the NATO alliance, not because any of them are talking about a global alliance or joining it as a proper member, but because as partners, they value the opportunity to exchange best practices and insights on a variety of challenges that know no geographic limits. We are talking to our friends in the Indo-Pacific about things like maintaining our technological edge, about protecting ourselves and deterring cyber attacks. We're talking with them about disinformation campaigns stemming both from the PRC and from Russia and what those 2 countries are learning from one another. So those 4 Indo-Pacific partners find real value in exchanges with NATO allies, and similarly, I can assure you that the allies here find real value in exchanging ideas and best practices with those 4 countries. On top of it, though, most of our Indo-Pacific partners have provided valuable assistance to our friends in Ukraine, whether it's economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, or security assistance. And they're doing that because they understand that Ukrainians are not just fighting to preserve their own territorial integrity, but they are, in fact, protecting and trying to preserve the key tenets of the UN Charter. And that gets right back to the question of sovereignty. But I will also note that the alliance is increasingly talking about what the PRC is doing in and around the Euro-Atlantic area. This is increasingly a topic of conversation here inside the NATO alliance. We're doing a lot more work in this space. And as we look at that challenge, we can no doubt learn from our friends in the Indo-Pacific and figure out how they've coped with similar challenges in their own region. So if I had to guess, I would suspect that once again, we will see the 4 Indo-Pacific partners join us at the Washington summit. Nothing's been finalized yet, but I think after having had them present, both at the Madrid summit in 2022 and the Vilnius summit in 2023, I think we would welcome the chance to have those 4 leaders join us again at the Washington summit. So stay tuned on that front. But this is a set of relationships that I think all NATO allies, not just the United States, but all NATO allies find tremendous value in.
Something that's really important that you mentioned at the outset is this idea of burden sharing. As you know, the 2014 Wales Summit was a critical moment for the alliance because it effectively set that 2% benchmark in terms of defense spending as a percentage of GDP. We're now 10 years from that summit, but as you mentioned, much of the alliance is still lagging behind that benchmark. To what extent do you believe this year's summit should address that shortfall, or maybe double down on it and make sure that the number of nations that meet that benchmark is as high as possible?
Well, I would just note for your audience that when you use the word most allies now meet the 2%, and that includes countries like Germany, Norway. There's a lot of breaking news out there. So at least 20, if not more, are going to hit the 2% mark. So the majority of folks are there. Now, that leaves a handful of allies that are not yet there, but I will say those allies have plans in place to get to the 2% in 2-3 years. And we will push, and we have pushed in recent years, but we will push as hard as we can to ensure that all the allies get there. But I need to say something else, and that is last year, at the Vilnius summit, we made clear that 2% is a floor, not a ceiling. And we said that because we also rolled out regional plans for the first time in decades. Now we have detailed military plans on what it takes to defend every inch of NATO territory. And in order to realize those plans, I think we are slowly reaching the conclusion that 2% will not be enough. And that is why some of the countries that are already in the 2% camp have moved on to 2.5 to 3%, and in the case of Poland, inching towards 4%. So allies are not waiting for everybody else to catch up. We have a number of allies, including some of our Nordic friends. We had the United Kingdom just make an announcement about their desire to get to 2.5%, Romania, 2.5. So a number of allies are moving out on stretching beyond the 2% to ensure that we can replenish our stocks from the valuable assistance that we provided to Ukraine over the last 2 years, and keep giving Ukraine additional forms of security assistance. So this is generally a good news story. We will be sure to keep our foot on the gas here at NATO to ensure that every NATO member meets its commitment to get to 2%, but we are well on our way.
All right, and with that, we are out of time, unfortunately. But Ambassador Smith, thank you very much for joining us here today. And thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting us this morning. We look forward to seeing you here in Washington in July.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to the Atlantic Council.
Thank you very much, Ambassador and Andrew, for that very insightful conversation. We're going to take a brief coffee break now for about 10 minutes, so come back at 10:45 when we will resume our programming with Atlantic Council President and CEO Fred Kemp, who will be moderating a discussion on the importance of supporting Ukraine ahead of the Washington summit. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll be back shortly.